Good morning, everyone. I'm Jelena Porter, Principal Deputy Spokesperson at the U.S. Department of State. It's an honor to virtually join you at the department's inaugural Student Foreign Policy Symposium dedicated to Hispanic-serving institutions. I began my journey into public service right where you are today, as a college student learning about international service opportunities. We hope that today is the start of a new journey for many of you who have an interest in foreign affairs and public service, or for those of you who might be learning about it for the first time. Our goal today is to bring Hispanic and Latinx students together to expand our collective knowledge and application of international affairs. We would also like to bring awareness of how foreign policy can impact the lives of Americans, both at home and abroad. You will hear from representatives of government fellowships, internships, and organizations that are dedicated to the advancement of Hispanic and Latinx students gaining entry into public service. We want to help build a community of students across institutions looking for ways to engage in foreign policy and also learn more about what it means to be a public servant. This inaugural symposium is more than just the beginning of the department's engagement with Hispanic and Latinx communities. Our team in the Bureau of Global Public Affairs and those across the department are prioritizing engagement with students from all walks of life to ensure that the work we do upholds American values. The United States is committed to being a global leader in the practice of democracy rooted in human rights, equity, and inclusion. That begins with the support of equal participation of diverse and underrepresented groups and uplifting students like yourselves, because we know that your experience and insight can help shape the world. It is imperative to the department and the future of U.S. federal agencies that we provide opportunities and resources that otherwise might not be accessible on your campus. Our flagship outreach programs are a great first start to send speakers to your campus to learn more about our invaluable work at the department. Our agency is proud to produce a conference dedicated to Hispanic and Latinx advancement in foreign policy careers. It's an honor to have the opportunity to engage with your communities and seek your participation on our team. To keep the conversation going after we log off of today's virtual space, consider sharing your LinkedIn profiles through the chat feature on the conference website. You may also send a direct message to the staff member at the department during today's discussions. I hope today's conference will inspire you to pursue a career in foreign affairs. And I know for certain that if you choose to do so, our department and our country will be better with your contributions. We look forward to working with you all in our pursuit to shape a better world and more inclusive future.
Good afternoon. Welcome on behalf of the U.S. Department of State. I've been looking forward to this all week long, and we are really excited to host this session to provide you with an overview of the U.S. Department of State's commitment to economic prosperity for all and our compelling views on how to leverage a career in economics as a public servant. I am Heather Joy Thompson. I am a career foreign service officer in the economic career track. I have served in South Africa, Mexico, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and at the United Nations. This afternoon, I'm joined by my colleagues, Carl Rios and Rodrigo Garza. Carl, let's start with you. Please tell us a bit about yourself and how you got started at the Department of State.
Thanks so much, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be joining you today on this panel, U.S. Commitment to Economic Prosperity. But let me first congratulate all of you for being here and getting this information from this conference. You already have a head start over many who have not even heard of the term Foreign Service Officer. I've worked at the Department of State for nearly 24 years, and you would think that my start in this career was something that you need to set from an early age. It wasn't, at least for me. I only became aware of this career path of being a Foreign Service Officer, or FSO, when I saw a bulletin board my senior year of college that highlighted an opportunity to take the Foreign Service exam. You know, what was really compelling about that is it seemed merit-based. You take an exam if you would like to enter government service. No need to submit a resume initially or fill out an application. The other reason that it was compelling is that it underlines that, at least for me, you don't need a certain pedigree or to graduate from a certain school or have a certain background to join the Department of State. My parents were immigrants to this country from Latin America and Europe. I have an undergrad degree from 2 state schools in the great state of Virginia. To get into the Department of State and become a Foreign Service officer, you just have to pass these tests. So, but what I did have, and something that I do think is important, is an interest in global issues and other countries. My dad was in the U.S. military. I was born in Germany, and I've lived in a variety of bases overseas, including in Panama. So after seeing that note about the Foreign Service exam, I took, but I initially didn't pass the test. So at that point, I filed away my State Department plans, got my MBA, and worked in the private sector for 6 years for a Fortune 500 company in strategic planning and manufacturing. It was a good job, but I grew restless after talking to a friend of mine who was working at State Department in Europe and dealing in counterterrorism issues. So at this point in my life, I was working with clients trying to determine the best type of resin to use for copier covers. So kind of weighing the 2 options, I took the exam again, and this time passed the written and oral parts of the exam. I haven't regretted it since. I've met heads of state. I've seen amazing things overseas that really wouldn't have seen otherwise. I met an amazingly diverse world in the process. I learned Dari in language school. I lobbied congressional staff on resolutions and led a U.S. delegation to energy talks in Paris. I've also worked on public health issues, worked on refugee policy in West Africa, development and governance issues in South Asia. I lobbied for a stronger trafficking in persons law in a Central American country, and supported stronger energy security in Latin America. In my current role, I'm very focused on the U.S. relationship with countries in the Western Hemisphere. I'm currently the Director of Economic Policy and Summit Coordination. And just finally, just to note, one note about my job, it's important to note that economic work isn't just about engaging with governments, and it goes beyond just trade issues and supply chains. It also deals with issues involving the environment, science, public health, and technology. I'll leave it there, and I'll wait for your questions. Thank you.
Okay, Rodrigo, over to you. Your mic is not on. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I'm glad we have you here, Heather, to let me know that. Apologies. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today and to speak with you about economic prosperity and how our work and our efforts make an impact in that, not only domestically, but in particular for us, internationally. I've been in the Foreign Service 18 years, 25 years of professional experience. I was fortunate enough to go to graduate school at the University of Miami, Florida. And when I was there, I followed up on something that intrigued me when I was in undergrad. I'm from Houston originally, but went to school in San Antonio, Texas, a small liberal arts school. And we had a diplomat in residence in that particular university in that time frame. And that's a position we have here at the Foreign Service, in which one of our Foreign Service officer colleagues is able to share information about this career, talk about international relations, and recruit individuals to take the exam. I didn't know anything about the Foreign Service at that time. I grew up Mexican American in Texas, and to be quite frank, from time to time I had issues with identity. I didn't know if I was Mexican or if I was American. I wasn't quite either. I didn't speak Spanish all that well growing up, and I definitely didn't look like some of my other classmates, and thus I had some identity issues, and realized after a few years that my identity was actually multifaceted, bicultural, 2 languages, 2 societies, and it really sort of thrust an interest in international affairs upon me. So I told myself, well, actually, I'm an American, but I'm also international. and I really got interested in international affairs. At St. Mary's, where I went to undergrad, the diplomat in residence individual, former ambassador, talked about the career, and I was quite intrigued. I took the exam, much like Carl just mentioned now. I was very intrigued by the fact and actually thankful that passing some exams would allow me to pursue a career in the Foreign Service. I often tell individuals that you could be a high school dropout and become a Foreign Service officer. Of course, you have to pass the exams. And what I'm going to say next is going to give you a little bit of understanding there. I took the exam when I was an undergrad, did not pass. I went off to graduate school, got really excited about working in the private sector, which I did. I was working in the electronic sector and riding the tech boom of the late 90s. A lot of experience and responsibility thrust upon me early. And then the dot-com bust happened. And I told myself, well, let me see what else is out there. And I went back to look to see what was going on with the Foreign Service, to take the exam again. I took it again 10 years later. And when I left the testing center, I told myself, either I got a lot smarter or that test got a lot easier. Of course, it was the former. And passed the exam. Graduate school and life experiences really helped quite a bit. Passed the orals. 18 years later, I'm here. I'm serving my country. I'm learning languages, experiencing different societies and cultures, and making an impact. And I think that's really what many of us join the Foreign Service and the State Department for, is that we want to make an impact in this world. We want to be potentially witnessing some sort of historical event or historical issue, a policy that is being formed that will change things. It's been really exciting. And much like Carl indicated, we can find economic dimensions to just about anything we do. I've done political work, administrative work, consular work, and management work in the department. I've done security work and political work and political military work. And in each of those particular assignments, there's an economic dimension. Carl mentioned energy security, and that's what I worked on when I was at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in Brussels. When I was in Honduras, as a director of our rule of law and law enforcement cooperation engagement, without security, it's very difficult to have economic engagement and development. They go hand in hand. They feed off each other. So just about anything we do in the department will have an economic dimension. I remember one of my favorite classes in graduate school was international political economy, meaning everything's political and everything has an economic dimension in the end. I'll leave it at that. I look forward to your questions. And thank you, Heather, for moderating us today.
It's my pleasure. And gentlemen, we're going to be starting off with a few questions that I've pre-selected that I'd like for you to respond to. And then we're going to open up the floor to our audience to hear from them and to answer the questions they may have. But before we get into that, I want to just flag for everyone who's watching that careers.state.gov is your one-stop shop to learn more about all the different career opportunities that we have at the Department of State, both in the civil service and in the Foreign Service. I know that many of you are students at this point, and we have several graduate school fellowships that may be of interest to you, where the department will pay for your graduate studies. And after you have completed your graduate studies, you will come on as a Foreign Service officer. So please go to careers.state.gov to learn more. And we have diplomats in residence, as Rodrigo noted, in Texas, but also in schools around the country who are there to help answer your questions, and also who have prep sessions for those of you who are interested in taking the Foreign Service Officer test. So careers.state.gov is where you can find information that is relevant to any of the things that I have raised, and also a lot more that I haven't. So let's get into these questions. I'd like to kick it off by asking, how do you balance your personal beliefs as diplomats when covering complex foreign policy efforts at the department? Carl, let's start with you.
All right, thanks, Heather. Yeah, that's an important question, and I think it underlines of what it means to be in government service. I mean, when we join the Foreign Service or join government service, we swear an oath to the Constitution as we begin. I mean, that includes a strong belief in all the components that underlie that Constitution. And at the same time, though, we're working in the executive branch, and we need to be responsive to the direction from our chain of command. For any organization to be effective, public or private sector, you need to have that clear chain. However, for me, joining the department comes from a feeling of service to this country. I mentioned that my parents are immigrants, were welcome to this country. My dad was originally from Nicaragua, and my mom is actually from France and Spain. So they have a different perspectives that they brought when they came to this country. And one of them was that they really appreciated the ability, one, to be here, and also to give back. My dad joined the military, and he saw that as a service to his country. I think that's some of the reasons why I joined, to also take part and express some of the appreciation I have for being a citizen in the United States. But in terms of at least the question, there are obviously policies that we may agree or have different opinions on, but there is at least a deliberative process inside the government to speak up and shape that policy. Inside each regional bureau, inside the functional bureaus, there's the ability to weigh in, provide opinions, to sit in meetings and provide, at least add to discussions about some of these policies that are formulated in what we call the interagency. So this is part of the reason that we have a National Security Council as a convening role, to gather the interagency, all the different agencies and bureaus in the US government, in order to develop the best policy. And part of that is from the perspective that diverse perspectives from components inside state and from other agencies really make for a better final policy. But ultimately, there are options for like clear dissent channels that are built in the department. So in case there is some policy that we have disagreements with, we can use that channel and actually communicate that directly to the highest levels at the Department of State. So just noting that, but I think, at least for me, I've been rewarded from feeling part of a team, to being able to engage on certain global issues that to me make a real difference, not only for this country, but for other countries that I've served in. So that's something that I appreciate every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Rodrigo?
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Carl. That was very comprehensive and articulate. And so maybe I'll just pepper in a couple of different thoughts since Carl covered it quite well. First and foremost, I think that we need to be open. Many of us come with preconceived ideas, beliefs, thoughts, some of them colored by our upbringing, our culture, our society, our community. So be open and leave those preconceived or those preformed ideas at the door. And I don't mean that in a harsh way. I just mean that through the policy formation process that Carl mentioned, and through your own efforts to research this particular issue, you're likely going to find out quite a bit more and learn a lot more about the different facets, the perspectives, the angles that a particular policy may or may not have. So being open or making yourself as open as possible to receive that, to educate yourself, and to research will help you immensely as you reconcile potentially with something that at least initially you thought was not something that you could support because of your beliefs or your thought process, etc. Carl mentioned the interagency and the clearance process. I've had a former boss who had lots of really interesting sayings. And one of them that he would say quite often is diversity is the catalyst of genius. And it really is. That's part of the reason why we have a diverse set of individuals in the department, and why we're trying to make it even more diverse so that we could have a variety of opinions and perspectives all come into the foray, be deliberated, and then through collaboration, through compromise, then we end up with an end product. Many times we call that the sausage making in Washington, D.C., and that really just refers to the policy formation process. There's many people involved, many agencies, what we call the interagency, that are involved. It's not perfect. Nothing in life really is. But don't allow, again, another saying, don't allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. I really believe that the process that is set up within the government is as good a process as possible. Nevertheless, we continue to refine it. We continue to find ways to improve it. And part of the effort to do so is this symposium, is attracting additional talent to the department and to public service writ large, so that your opinion, your perspective can also be integrated and taken into account.
Thank you. Can you tell me about a life-changing experience that you've had that inspired your work as an economic officer?
Heather, why don't I take this one first, since Carl has been on the spot the last couple of times. I'll share the wealth or the pain, maybe. I mentioned one of the life-changing episodes in my life, and that was meeting the diplomat in residence at St. Mary's University when I was an undergrad. That was really formative in providing me information and giving me enthusiasm. He was not only a purveyor of information, but acted as a quasi-mentor for a couple of years. So that was definitely a life forming and changing experience. One of the other things that is specific to me is I'm a son, obviously, of immigrants, Mexican immigrants that came to this country over 50 years ago. And my father was a very industrious individual, set up his own business, and we had a meat market taco place. And I, as part of the family business, was expected to participate and contribute. Often when I did not feel like it, or often when I had no sleep from going out in high school. But that experience, that engagement in terms of developing my interpersonal skills, developing my customer service acumen and approach, developing a collaborative way of working, really colored sort of the way that I've carried out my life in many ways. Instilled a work ethic that I think is great, but sometimes a few of my family lament because I'm always working, but that's a different story. That experience, being the son of a small business owner and engaging with a wide set of customers, developing those interpersonal skills, really sort of thrust me towards a career that was a bit more public facing, a bit more focused on engagement and relationship building, rapport building, and building that trust and confidence that is essential when you need to work with someone, to build a relationship with someone. So those two things, I would say, have been formative in my life.
Okay. And Carl, before we get to you, I just want to note two things for the students who are watching. So number one, you do not have to be an economist to do economic work at the Department of State. I'm a lawyer. I took one econ class in my entire life in law school, and it was called Econ for Lawyers, and it was basically a way to teach you how to balance your books. But because I selected economics as my career track, over the course of my career at the department, I've had the opportunity to take a lot of department-funded training at the Foreign Service Institute, which is basically like diplomatic university. We have a dedicated school in Arlington, Virginia, where we go for training between assignments and often even during assignments, whether it's in language or in area studies or in subject matter studies. So don't think that just because you don't already have the academic or professional background that you can't work in this field. There's always a place for you at the State Department, irrespective of what your formal training may have been. So now over to you, Carl. What was your life-changing event that's sort of shaped your experience as an economic officer?
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, it's. I think we come to this career in many different ways. In some ways, some of this was baked in. I mentioned that I have a business degree. I got my MBA. I was working in the private sector. So selecting the economic cone made sense, based on my study, my interests. But I think in some cases you grow into what you do. You become better informed, and I think at least in terms of my career, I grew to really appreciate everything that's entailed in working in the economic cone and being an economic officer. I think one of the key, at least pivotal points for me was when I was assigned to the country of Guinea in West Africa, sub-Saharan Africa in 2002. A civil war in Sierra Leone had just ended. Another one was starting in Liberia. At the time, Guinea was hosting hundreds of thousands of refugees. But nonetheless, it was still better off than its neighbors, but still very poor, despite being rich in commodities and other issues. Even the capital at the time, Conakry, faced frequent and disruptive energy blackouts. But what it meant is that you saw an immediate divide between those of means and those who didn't. The wealthy businesses, embassies like the U.S. Embassy, we had access to generators. So whenever there was a blackout, we could power that on and continue working. However, for the most part, the poor didn't have that energy access. They relied on kerosene lamps because they didn't really have access to that grid. And what electricity did exist for most of the urban poor at that time was found in certain businesses. A key example were these really brightly lit modern gas stations that are found throughout the capital. So invariably, when I was driving back from the embassy going home after dark, I would see school children from the neighborhood diligently working on their homework in the only place that had enough light, these parking lots and these modern gas stations. They had their notebooks open, they were sprawled on the ground and just trying to complete their lessons as quickly as possible. And it's something that I hadn't forgotten, and it really underlines that this sort of energy access, and just this one example, is so crucial, and not only for businesses, but also for kids' educations, their livelihood, for security. Rigo talked about how some of the economic issues we work on have so many different impacts and can benefit people. And that is something that sometimes you forget when you're back in Washington, but having that touch point to that incident, or at least that experience working in sub-Saharan Africa, really made a difference in connecting the dots for me and making me aware that some of the policy making that we do here in Washington really does make a difference in people's lives. So that World Bank loan, that IDB loan, USG technical assistance, that is really can have a major impact for people. And it's for that reason that I really truly appreciate my career as an economic officer. I can work on real issues that really move the ball forward in terms of development.
Thank you. So I mentioned earlier that careers.state.gov is our one-stop shop for people who are interested in careers at the State Department to learn more about the jobs and professional and academic opportunities that we offer. And we operate in 5 different career tracks. So all 3 of us are economic officers. And I'd like to ask you, do you have any advice for the students who are watching today's program on how to leverage their studies, their internships, their professional development to pursue a career in economic affairs at State? Arrigo, let's start with you.
Thank you, Heather. That's a good question. A question that's not easy. There's a lot of sort of angles to it. I think first and foremost, when people ask me, how do I get involved in foreign policy? How do I understand what's going on within our government? Often the answer is come to Washington and do an internship. That's not always easy and available for folks. Washington is a very expensive city. Having to support yourself when you're doing often unpaid internships can be very complicated and just unattainable for folks. But what I think focus should be is developing your networking skills. Is definitely one aspect and one thing that I would encourage. That can be done wherever you are, wherever you're working, whatever internship you're doing, whatever you're involved in. And that takes work. People think that it's easy and you have to be an outgoing person. Yes and no. Much like a relationship, a friendship, you have to put time and effort into it. And it may not pay off for years. You may strike up a friendship with someone that you work with or that you engage with in your community, be it church, be it part of your extended family, and you encourage that relationship. You maintain it. You follow up from time to time. You develop those interpersonal and communication skills that demonstrate to individuals that you care, that you have sympathy, you have empathy, that you understand their issues. And that goes a long way when you're building a network and relationships. And so you could do that in any particular way, fashion, or form, and whatever you're involved in. So that's one way. An additional way that I think that you could leverage, your studies or your internships is take them to the next level. And what do I mean by that? Well, do additional research, do additional study on a particular problem or a particular project that you're working on, and dive a little deeper into it. Find out who else is working on it. Find out if there are other organizations or other entities that you could collaborate with on it, and show initiative, show motivation to go beyond the scope that you've been given, to think outside the box, to be creative. Those are two ways that I think you could leverage your existing experiences or what you're working on now or where you're working in order to gain additional insight and potential forays into a career in the Foreign Service or in public service writ large.
Before I joined the department, I had a mentor who was an ambassador who had gone to my alma mater, Spelman College, and she was a career ambassador and was also an economic officer. And as I mentioned, I did not have a background in econ, and so much of the work of econ seemed very wonky to me. And so I just asked her straight up one day, I was like, what's the bottom line here? What are you actually doing with all this policy formation and these talks? And she gave me a very succinct framework through which I always read and view things now. She said, at the end of the day, econ work comes down to who gets what and why. So whenever I'm reading an article that deals with economic policy, those are the two things that I keep in mind, like who's benefiting from whatever money is being talked about, and then why is this a policy priority for us? And that has helped me a lot in being able to distill the most salient and relevant points from reading, because sometimes, you're reading in the Financial Times or The Economist, and when you're just starting out, some of these concepts seem very esoteric, or they can seem very esoteric. But if you have that bottom line, like, okay, there's some money that's being talked about, or there's a bottom line principle being talked about, and these are the two things that I need to figure out in order to understand why this is important to us. And so, Rodrigo, just to further your encouragement about reading, I would say to those of you who are interested in getting smart on an issue and really boning up, to set up a Google alert for the topic that you're interested in, to take, half an hour each day. You're not going to get smart on it overnight. Give yourself a month or two to really start building up your speed, especially if you're doing this as an aside and not as part of your normal coursework. We're not saying give 3 hours a day. Just really give yourself some time and some space to start to synthesize the concepts, to understand who the thought leaders are and what the reputable sources are, and then try and read as diverse a group of opinions and subject matter experts on the area in which you're trying to really gain some understanding as possible, so that you're not just seeing things through a single lens. Carl, over to you for your advice.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, great answers on that question. I think a lot of it, as indicated, is it's important to stay informed about these opportunities. Internships are obviously a great way of doing that, and do try to take advantage of those. I do, and I imagine this has already been discussed in other parts during this symposium, but Pickering and Rangel Fellowships are also great programs and worth following. Our former acting assistant secretary here in Bureau of Western Hemisphere's Affairs, Julie Chung, was a Pickering Fellow. In my office, we had a Pickering Fellow that helped set up logistics for a regional climate dialogue. So those are programs really worth following up on. The other thing just to note is it's a wide universe of foreign affairs agencies and a foreign affairs bench. You have other departments, Treasury Department, USAID, Commerce. They all have a role. I mean, obviously they have a domestic role, but they also have a foreign affairs component too. So if you have interest in foreign affairs, it's worth looking into those as well. Not to mention NGOs. Those are other opportunities. Of course, I'm biased about the State Department. I think it's been provided enormous number of opportunities to me. As indicated, I haven't regretted it since. But what I do think it's important to have really at the seat of any desire to join is some interests in these issues, a real drive to understand more, and really a desire to learn more about the world. At least from an economic perspective, if you're interested in climate issues or trade, broad macroeconomic analysis, these are things you can pursue inside this cone. But it is, even inside state, there's a number of cones, there's a number of issues. So there's many different paths that can be developed from that. I'm speaking from a foreign service officer perspective, but there's also the civil service angle. My wife, in fact, is a civil service officer, and she's pursued her interest in energy issues and works in the state's Energy and Natural Resource Bureau. So as indicated, a lot of paths to get to where you want, but above all, stay informed. If you have that hunger for these sort of issues, there's a lot of great opportunities. I do think state is one of the best ways of addressing that. Thanks.
Thank you. You guys may have heard Carl use cone. I use it sometime. That's our old school shorthand for our career our career tracks that we have at the department. So we've had a bit of a switch in nomenclature in the last couple of years. So those of us who've been in for a while will use cones because that's what they were always called, but they're just the 5 career tracks that foreign service officers operate in. And you select one at the very beginning of your career, but you're not tied to working in that. You can work outside of your career track as well. It's sort of like having your major in college. So, you have the core of your assignments will probably be in your career track, but then you can work outside of that track as well. So I'm going to switch over for a moment to a question from the audience. Isabel asks, can you speak to collaborating with foreign governments while overseas? What is it like to work in an embassy with locally employed staff and advancing goals as part of a country team? And just to frame this for you guys before we get to Carl and Rodrigo, the country team is the team within the embassy with the leaders of different sections and different agencies. At any given embassy, we have the Department of State, but we also have representatives from other United States government departments. So commerce or, sometimes we'll have, different law enforcement agencies or people who are from the Department of Defense. So the country team meeting is when all those people who are the heads of their departments get together on a weekly basis with the ambassador or chief of mission to discuss issues that are cross-cutting. Okay, so Rodrigo, with that, over to you.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you, Isabel, for the question. Maybe I'll start with a little bit of context. The State Department has about 75 to 80,000 employees worldwide. A large component is domestic, either working as a foreign service officer or a civil servant. But over 50% actually of our employees in the State Department are what we call locally employed staff. And these are the individuals that are from the host country that either the embassy or consulate is located in. And they work alongside us, often 40, 50, 60 years at a time. These individuals, in the end, often know us better than we know ourselves, and really help us move forward on our foreign policy objectives. And they're the institutional memory of sort of our engagement with a particular country and its individuals. Now, engaging with your interlocutors is a word that we like to use that just means someone that you're talking to, engaging with. In a particular country, obviously depends on their political persuasion sometimes, depends on their economic reality, depends a little bit on the topic, of course, that you're discussing. But it's always interesting from my experience. It's often exhilarating, and it behooves us to think not just about ourselves and our foreign policy objectives and our sort of thrust for the engagement, but in any sort of engagement or negotiation, because life in the end is a series of negotiations, you also have to figure out or understand what's the motivation, what's the why are these individuals speaking to me? What's their objective? And you try to speak to that. And one of the things that I have focused on quite a bit in my career is aligning not only my foreign policy objectives and that of my government or my embassy or consulate when I'm abroad, but also aligning it with the foreign policy objectives, motivations of my host country and those interlocutors, and finding a way that we can find common and middle ground. It's not always possible right away. And in the end, it's not always possible either. But making the effort, in many of the places that we work, showing up, actually having a meeting, for them is progress, because they've engaged with a country that is often seen as a world leader in X, Y, or Z. So you've already done half the work sometimes just by engaging with them. Then it behooves us to understand their motivation, understand where they want to go, and find a way where we can go there together, and that we could collaborate, and that we each have a 60-60 deal. As one of my former bosses that I mentioned earlier like to say, it's a 60-60 deal, meaning win-win.
Great, thank you. Carl?
Yeah, thanks, Heather, and Rigo, thanks for that response. Ultimately, our role as U.S. diplomats is to represent our country. Ultimately, that means we want to do what's best for the United States, but also for U.S. citizens that are present in that country, that are in businesses that may be there. So that's one aspect. But for the most part, we in terms of engaging with other governments, we align, but there's always going to be circumstances where you have differences of opinion, and that's just the nature of the role. And of course, it depends on the career track, as Heather was mentioning, what type of role you have in an embassy. If you're an economic officer, you may be working with the finance ministry on some issue involving terrorism finance. May not be a lot of objections or concerns. They may see eye to eye. But if it's something, for example, if you're working in the political career track, if it's about a vote in the UN, well, they may have the host government may have a totally different perspective when it comes to that issue. So that's something that you have to keep in mind. Another part that I just want to emphasize too is it's not necessarily just about working with the government. When you're in another country, you're in that society. So sometimes the government angle is important, but there's other stakeholders there that are equally important. The people-to-people contacts are really beneficial and can also help move not only foreign policy, but economic policy. Working with businesses that are there in the country, you can get a lot of information and understanding about what's really happening there in the country, and just a better appreciation for some of the challenges they may face. They may not necessarily be aligned with U.S. interests because they're a private sector. They want to make funds or grow their business, but it's important to get their perspective. But it also goes with the idea of not just listening to the elite in any society, talking to NGOs, people that are working in different parts of the country. That's all part of diplomacy in order to get a better picture, a fuller appreciation of what exists in that society and in that culture. And what Rigo said about the locally employed staff, honestly, I'm not sure how we could do our work without some of these experts that are found overseas. They're natives to the country. They have a good and excellent understanding, and I've always relied on them on my staff to at least get a better understanding and clarity about who to engage with, and just on some of the key issues that are found in any country.
Thank you. And if I could just add to that, we're going abroad as professionals, but we are always still students. And part of your duty as a foreign service officer when you're abroad is to really learn, understand, and then communicate what's going on in the country where you live. So, of course, you're going to have, your officially sanctioned meetings with your counterparts and maybe even staff meetings with your superiors and meet government secretaries, and that's fine, and that's well, and that's expected as a part of the job. But when you're out grocery shopping, or you're getting a haircut, or you're just having lunch at a cafe and you're overhearing the guys who are cleaning up the cafe talking, all of those things matter. Those people live in that society and inform what's going on in that society, and also can give you an early preview of things that won't show up in the newspaper for weeks or months after. So you really need to be very respectful of the society that you're going into and understand that every single person in that society has something they know that you don't know, and that they know that may be of benefit to you. So I encourage people who are considering careers in diplomacy to really think about being fully ingratiated into the local culture and not just at the professional level. So let's switch to our next question, which is also from the audience. What do you think are the biggest challenges to advancing economic prosperity as the pandemic grows? And how is climate change impacting your department's efforts in the Western Hemisphere? Well, those are two small ones, COVID and climate. Rodrigo, care to give an answer?
Well, thank you for that question. Obviously, a challenging one, one that we're working on diligently throughout the government and in society. Building back better is one of the things that we're focused on in terms of our recovery from the pandemic. First and foremost, we're focused on public health and making sure public health systems, not only in this country, but internationally, are bolstered, that they're more resilient, so that, number one, they can recover from this particular pandemic, and more importantly, even be prepared for the next one in a much more robust fashion than we were for this particular pandemic. In terms of, how do we also deal with the dual crisis of climate change and the changes that we're experiencing throughout our planet due to some of the industrial and man-made processes that we've embarked upon over the last 50 to 100 years, where we're trying to incorporate and integrate those efforts at the same time. We need to look at what's transpired also as an opportunity. And what I mean by that is that decarbonization, addressing climate change can also be an opportunity in shifting our economic output, our opportunities for employment, not only in this country but around the world, into industries and technologies that will benefit our climate, but will also benefit the everyday man and woman in every country around the world, producing better jobs that have futures, jobs that have the ability to transform and to grow. That's really one of the main thrusts for that we're focused on. So at the same time, we can address recovery, but at the same time, look towards the future, look towards a reality that addresses climate change, but uses that as an opportunity to introduce and to bolster new technologies, new industries, and at the same time, provide employment around the world.
Thank you. Carl?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. It goes without saying that this pandemic has, at least in my current role, I'm the Director of Economic Policy and Summit Coordination for the Bureau of Western Hemisphere. This has been a key, a dominant feature, at least the work of our office. We've had a key role in tracking the public health impact of the pandemic, but also the economic impact across countries. At a certain point, even though the Western Hem is only 8% of the global population, at least in Latin America, Caribbean, it had over 30% of total deaths. So it's had a major impact in this hemisphere. One of the positive things and really a key things that we've been working on is vaccine donations. We've been very engaged in working with the interagency in the White House in the process of dispersing these U.S. government vaccine donations across the region. At least globally, we've donated about 180 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines to more than 100 countries and economies. So it's a major milestone. For this hemisphere, we've donated about roughly over 44 million doses to 29 countries in this hemisphere. So for most advanced economies, 60% of the populations are fully vaccinated. However, if you're looking at low-income countries, about 96% remain unvaccinated. Latin America and the Caribbean, it's mostly middle-income countries, but because of highly unequal wealth distribution, the average for vaccination is about 30%, which is about the global average. So a lot of work remains there. The other facet too about looking at the Western Hemisphere is the whole issue of the inequities between the rich and the poor here. I mentioned that we have a lot of middle income countries, but there's a lot of disparity in the range between the rich and the poor there. So very definite large pockets of poverty remain. Nonetheless, the U.S. does have a crucial role. We need to work with the region in terms of supporting an economic recovery. We are the top trading partner for about 2/3 of the hemisphere's countries, have a number of free trade agreements, but nonetheless, we need to work collectively with them. As you've seen by some of the supply chain issues, we are not isolated globally. We need to work with other countries in order to not only make sure that the global economy gets back on track, but also some of these countries in our country can actually move forward effectively. In terms of climate change, there's a lot of focus on that right now. We're looking at COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. It starts October 31st through November 12th. It's a key issue. We've had, there was a climate summit that included a number hosted by the U.S. virtually, Special Envoy for Climate, Kerry. chaired it, but that was the event early this year. And we also had a regional climate dialogue in which we helped support the regional engagement. So a lot of focus on what we can do in terms of encouraging countries that meet some of those targets in terms of reducing emissions. But the other facet too about climate is the mitigation. The impact that climate change is seen not only in our country, but obviously throughout globally and also in the hemisphere. In some cases, the impact of these severe storms, hurricanes, droughts, food insecurity, these are all factors that are likely linked to climate change. So things that we can do in terms of encouraging or developing adaptation, mitigating the circumstances or impacts of these climate effects are important. And that's part of at least the work that we're looking at. We look forward to COP26 and seeing some of the public announcements. But right now, it's all hands on deck, a very focused drive to seeing what can come out of that. At the same time, just wanted to note that we'll be hosting in the United States the Summit of the Americas. So this is the first time since 1994. The first one was held in Miami. So that gives us another opportunity to look at some of the challenges that the region is facing, and also to work in terms of building consensus on some of the turning the corner from the pandemic, and also looking at ways we can at least improve the economics and address some of those social inequities that I mentioned.
Thank you. We only have a few minutes left, and unfortunately, we will not be able to get to all of the amazing questions that these our audience members have posed. I do want to highlight one and then ask you guys for your final piece of advice for the people who are watching today. So we have someone who's written in, I don't know their name, but they said, does the Department of State look for inventors, innovators, big thinkers, entrepreneurs? Yes, we do. All of those things. We want all of the talent, all the good people. Rodrigo, will you give us a parting piece of advice?
I will indeed. And thank you again, Heather, for moderating. Thanks to the audience for paying attention, hopefully, throughout this session. A career in foreign service, a career in public service is something that's attainable. It really is. Son of first-generation immigrants who had no idea that this career even existed in college, and then stumbled upon it. Did not find success initially, but came back around to it. And 18 years later, I've been in Vietnam, Peru, Afghanistan, Belgium, Honduras, Washington, D.C. for work. And then obviously all the opportunities that are given to you when you are in those places, or when you're working domestically and you get to travel for your job. It is absolutely attainable. If you develop good networking skills, good communication skills, good interpersonal skills, you could do whatever you want in life. And I'll just leave you with that.
Thank you. And Carl, last words.
I've lived in 5 countries, 3 continents, and I've really had some amazing experiences. But what I can say is that this is a rewarding career. Stay open, be aware. There's always challenges in life. There's challenges even in this career field. But if you have that motivation, if you really want to work in this area, foreign affairs, pursue it. Gather as much information as possible. And as Rigo says, networking is great, but stay open to the possibility. And ultimately that can be your North Star in moving forward and reaching what you want to do in terms of this sort of career.
Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. I just want to give one last plug for the amazing economic team that we have here at the Department of State, and really encourage you to consider joining us working on these important and cross-cutting issues. Thank you and good afternoon.